It's easy to glamorize the Old West. When we think of cowboys, we picture men with six-shooters on their hips, Stetsons on their heads, and a horse for company. It was romanticized in countless books and films. But what was life really like for a cowboy back then? How did they spend their time? What kind of dangers did they face? And how did they die? In this episode of Only in the West, we look at the gritty reality of life as a cowboy in the Old West. It's not all saloons and shootouts. There were plenty of mundane tasks involved in being a cowboy. Just like any other job, they had to get up early, work long hours, and do a lot of the same thing day in and day out. Ranching was a lonely job. Cowboys spent months on end, away from home, working hard and eating little more than beans, bacon, and dried meat. There was little excitement and few of the conveniences we take for granted today. A cowboy's work was hard, dangerous, and often thankless. They herded cattle across the plains, drove them to market, and rounded up strays. They also had to repair fences, brand calves, and mend their own clothes. In short, they did everything it took to keep the ranch running smoothly. A cowboy's life was filled with more than just hard work. There were dangers around every corner: stampedes, falling off cliffs, getting lost in the wilderness, freezing to death in the winter, or being scalded to death by a sudden geyser. No, seriously, that happened to one guy named Tom Grosh in 1886. He was driving his cattle across the desert when a sudden geyser shot up from the ground, scalding him to death. It was the only recorded death of its kind. When they weren't working, cowboys liked to relax in saloons, gamble, and drink. Gambling was a popular pastime for cowboys, who often played poker or blackjack to pass the time and try to win some money. Drinking was also a common way for cowboys to relax, and they often drank whiskey or beer. Some cowboys even became famous for their drinking abilities, such as the legendary Wyatt Earp, who was said to be able to drink more than anyone else in town. Despite the dangers and hardships, most cowboys loved their jobs. They were free to roam the open range, work with animals, and live a simple life. Plus, there was always the chance that they might strike it rich one day and make a name for themselves. After all, there were plenty of opportunities for adventure in the Old West. Let's talk about those guns. Back in the day, when cowboys weren't busy wrangling cattle, they sure did love to pull out their six-shooters and have a shootout with the bad guys. It was a high-risk, high-reward kind of life. If you survived, you earned the respect of your fellow cowboys. But if you didn't, well, let's just say your obituary might have been written in blood. The most common cause of death for cowboys was, believe it or not, heart attacks. Yep, you heard me right. All that whiskey drinking and saloon brawling took its toll on their health, and many a cowboy met their end with a heart attack in their 30s or 40s. Other common causes of death included tuberculosis, pneumonia, and typhoid fever. Accidents also played a role, with gun-related deaths, falls, and stampedes all claiming victims. But how did people die in the Old West? Well, let's start with the most dramatic and gruesome way to go: the shootout. Shootouts were a common occurrence in the Old West, and they could erupt over just about anything: a game of poker, a saloon brawl, or a dispute over land or water rights. When the smoke cleared, there might be one or more bodies lying on the ground, the victims of a hail of bullets. Then there were the outlaws. Outlaws like Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch and the James Younger Gang robbed trains and stages, and they weren't afraid to kill anyone who got in their way. The authorities were constantly on their trail, and there were plenty of shootouts between the outlaws and law enforcement, but it wasn't all about gunslingers and shootouts. Diseases were also a major killer in the Old West. Smallpox, cholera, and tuberculosis were common, and there was no effective treatment for most of these diseases. People would often die within days or weeks of coming down with an illness. Accidents were another leading cause of death in the Old West. People died in mining accidents, train wrecks, and stagecoach robberies. And of course, there were the occasional freak accidents, like the time a man was killed when a piano fell on him. Yes, a piano. So whether you died in a shootout, from disease, or in a freak accident, there were plenty of ways to meet your end in the Old West. But hey, at least it was never boring. Today, cowboys are mostly found working on ranches or competing in rodeos. The days of the wild frontier are long gone, but the legend of the cowboy lives on. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Only in the West. If you did, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And be sure to visit our site for more articles on the Old West and other historical topics. Thanks for watching.